Themselves, and then we'll go ahead and get this thing started. I'm going to start on my far left.
Good evening. Thank you so much, Roland. Steve Perry, head of schools for the Capital Preparatory Schools in Connecticut and New York.
Thank you, Roland. Elizabeth Davis, president of the Washington Teachers Union.
Shawn Hardnett, CEO and founder of Statesman College Preparatory Academy for Boys here in Washington, D.C.
Margaret Fortune, president of Fortune School in Sacramento, California.
So I'm going to set it up this way. So I went to public schools my entire life, from K through college. And my parents first we had the opportunity to go to magnet schools. My brother and sisters, we were all in different magnet schools all at one time. And about 5 years ago, when I began to look at the school choice ed reform movement, and my wife is she was a college dean, she was a college vice president, certified educator. I've got brother, 3 sisters who are all educators as well, numerous family members. And so I spent a good 3 years just studying and assessing, looking at school choice movement. We had discussed this issue on different shows. And then when I made the decision to launch this initiative, there were people who were saying, well, why would you do this? Because you're not an educator. When the reality is, there are lots of people who are involved in education, who are education advocates. If you are an entrepreneur, you're a business owner, education impacts you because the quality of your employees is based upon what they went through in schools. And so I made this decision because what I determined, because I'm going to start here with our panel, what I determined is that the fundamental issue that I had with the school choice ed reform movement was that we were dealing with kids. Now majority of the kids in public schools today are black and brown. And you were dealing with a movement that frankly was white-led. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't be white, you can't be involved in this movement. The problem was that you did not have African Americans in significant numbers who were leading schools, who were at the table, who were making those decisions. And I said, I want to use my voice and my platform to be able to elevate those individuals, to elevate the issue as well, because the reality is when you look at black and brown communities, we are two things: distrustful and loyal as hell. If we don't know you, we ain't working with you, we're not talking with you, we're not aligning with you. Yet if we do know you and we trust you, then we will sit there and stand with you and fight for you. And this movement, to me, I believe has not gone as far as it could go because of that. I've been very vocal in calling out this very issue. I've made some people in this movement real uncomfortable. I told them I don't care about making y'all uncomfortable. God gave me a spirit to make folks uncomfortable. I said, if y'all want to be comfortable, call my wife. She'll pray with y'all and lay hands on y'all. She's an ordained minister. That's all you got to do. But I really believe that we are at a point where black folks have got to stop being bamboozled by people who say charter schools are horrible, they are bad, because the reality is our history will show you we've had every form of education. There are black folks who went to traditional public schools, who went to private schools, who went to Catholic schools, who went to Montessori schools. They've gone to all sorts of schools. And why is it that we would be in a situation where we can actually control not just the school, but the curriculum, who we hire, control the contracts, and then say, I'm going to fight that? That, to me, is ludicrous. And I want to start this off first with Steve. And Steve, that's something that has really bugged me, because you and I spend more time on social media knocking down folks who lie. And and also, let's be clear. I do not believe that one form of education is the be-all to end-all, that is somehow a panacea. No, this is a part of the solution. It's not the solution. But it drives me crazy, Steve, when I hear our people, a lot of people who are very smart, well-educated, who fall for this okey doke as if you do not have successful black-run charter schools across this country, as if they really don't matter.
Well, it wasn't enough for our enslavers to control our physical movement or to rape our women. It wasn't enough for them to limit our ability to live as humans. They had to take it one step further. They had to make teaching black people to read illegal. Since we entered this country, there has been a system in place with the very explicit expectation that our humanity will be robbed from us. And it is no surprise that coming out of the shackles of slavery, among the first things that African Americans did was start schools. We come from a long history of people who started schools because we understand that self-determination is established through education, that you create the foundation of your community by teaching your children and extending your history. What do Jewish people do? They send their children to school after school. What do many Asian cultures do? They send their children to school after school because they don't trust the American public education system to carry their traditions forward. It was Dr. King who said in 1968 in his final book, Where Do We Go From Here? Community to Chaos? He said the American school system does not know what to teach or how to teach. That's Dr. King. Dr. King said in the final chapter of his final book written in his hand, he said, I do not wish to wait for our schools to be integrated. He said, we should create educational parks that exist outside of the community, that draw children from far and wide. Sound like charter schools to me, sound like magnet schools to me. Let us not be fooled by the juxtaposition of this conversation. If you were to go through this building with all of these well-dressed, well-heeled, very thoughtful people, you will find very few of us who send our children to failed urban schools. And the few who do send their child to a school of that type, if we're going to be honest, their child is likely in a magnet program or some other pull-out program or experience that doesn't have them with the general population of poor, black, and Latino people. And so this is really a conversation about keeping it honest. The opposition to school choice, even by people who are the same color as we, is typically driven by a simple notion: will I lose my job if these black people get the opportunity to serve their own community with something that has been so integral to our community from the time that we were here, which is the fight for education? So, here we are, African Americans who started our own schools. There is nothing more revolutionary in the American experience than for black people to stand up and say, I will teach my own to read, write, and compute, as opposed to sending them to schools that are guaranteed to suspend them at a rate of 4 times greater than any other, have them drop out at a higher rate than any other, and fail factories seen as acceptable. There is no more powerful declaration of our own humanity as black people, even for light-skinned ones with curly hair, than to stand on our own 2 feet and say we are not going to send our children to schools that we know will not educate them. You cannot call it a school if children don't learn. You can call it a bomb shelter, you can say it's a voter registration, you can call it whatever you want, but you can't call it school until children learn. So at the end of the day, this conversation begins where it began. When we got here, it was not enough to lock us up. We had to be robbed of our humanity, and the way to rob us of our humanity was to rob us of access to education. It is the reason why over 75% of young people who are incarcerated cannot read. The school to prison pipeline is a real thing, brothers and sisters, and it is not billionaires and trillionaires or whatever else anybody wants to tell you. It's middle-class people wanting to keep their middle-class teaching jobs, wanting to keep their middle-class corrections officer jobs, wanting to keep their middle-class probation officer jobs. It's a real thing. And we can disrupt that by very simply changing the trajectory of where a child goes to school.
Margaret, a few months ago, you invited me out to Sacramento, and we had an event there. And it was quite interesting because the California General Assembly, they had a bill going through that would essentially establish a moratorium on charter schools. But what was interesting to me is when y'all began to lay the numbers out, and you had a state representative from Sacramento who was sponsoring the bill, yet, what was it, of the top 10 performing schools for black kids in the whole state, was it 2 or 3 of those, of the 10, your schools were right in his district?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true.
So you had a black state rep whose wife was a school board member of the Sacramento School District who was sponsoring a bill that would create a moratorium when his own district had 3 of the top performing black schools in the whole state. That to me shows how illogical this is, that you would have black state legislators fighting something that actually is helping their own constituents.
Yeah. You know, on this topic of self-determination, Roland, you know, there are, you know, to what you just stated, there are only 10 schools in the state of California, which has 6 million students, that have a majority black student population that are in the top half of academic performance in math and English language arts. Only 10. 8 of them are public charter schools, and 3 of them are located in Sacramento, where I'm from, and one of them is my school. We're number 3 on the list and climbing. I come from a family of educators. My father is a public school superintendent, retired. One of the proudest moments in his life and mine is when he handed me my high school diploma. When I walked across the stage, because he was my superintendent, and I went to school with him every day until I got my own driver's license. My parents, both my parents on both sides come from educators, and we were the folks that ran the one-room schoolhouse in the South. as a means of self-determination in terms of educating our community. And we continue with that work. If I was in my father's generation, I would probably be a public school superintendent. And I would be fighting the odds within the only system that there was to serve black kids to a level of excellence. But even my father, who was a public school superintendent and served in his entire career in the public schools,
as we teach our students week after week, they're able to build.
When the charter school law came along in California, as a sitting public school superintendent, he adopted that as another tool in his tool chest. Now, for the district that he ran, it was not majority African American. And so he created charter schools for largely Slavic communities that were homeschooling their kids and weren't going to the district anyway, as a way to pull them in to the system. It was a tool in his tool chest. For me, as a next generation educator, I don't want to have to apologize for the fact that I'm starting schools to close the black achievement gap. I do that without apology. And I also don't want to be in a system where I have to be a maverick in order to care about that issue. And in fact, in a state where blacks are about 6 to 8% of the population, 64% of my teachers are teachers of color, and among that, 37% are black. And it's because we're having this very direct conversation in our community about closing the African American achievement gap through a regional initiative to prepare kids for college starting in kindergarten. And so our County Board of Education, and at the time at which they adopted this resolution, only one of them was black, the chair. So we had to form a coalition of the willing. They made a regional initiative to close the African American achievement gap by replicating my charter schools. And now we have 7 schools, and indeed, in the county where I'm from, in Sacramento, we have closed the achievement gap for my students in mathematics. In fact, when the next round of state test scores come out statewide, we have access to ours now, you'll see that in the past 2 years, our math scores have increased by 20 percentage points. Such that we are on pace to be 10 percentage points ahead of the county before you even consider race or poverty. And so to me, it is not a progressive position to categorically say this type of school, because we don't like your governance structure, and because we don't like the union status of your teachers, is something that we object to, which is in large measure what we're hearing from some Democrats in the presidential election. A whole category of schools. We're willing to disrespect the educators who created those schools because we believe in self-determination and the fact that our low-income parents, our parents of color who otherwise would be attending failing schools, should have the choice, just like wealthy white parents do, to send their kids to schools, to public schools, tuition-free, schools of their choice.
Elizabeth, last night I was in Houston for the debate at Texas Southern University, and this was one of the issues that did come up. Elizabeth warned during the debate. She said if she's president, she's going to ensure that all education dollars go to public schools. Well, these are also public charter schools. Juliana Castro also talked about this issue. And what I've never understood is why can't these systems coexist at one time? Here in Washington, D.C., there was a moment that when Michelle Reed was here, when there was this whole battle back and forth. And the reality is traditional schools and charter schools right now are coexisting in this city. Why do folks act as if that can't happen? Why is there even a debate on this issue? Just your thoughts.
Which one?
Liz?
Elizabeth?
Yes.
Thank you. And thank you, Roland, for inviting me. I'm accustomed to a moderator who is neutral on an issue. Of course, in this case, it's not the case. However, it's quite all right.
That's all good.
It's quite all right.
Because the name,
But I do want to
the
say
name of the
this.
initiative is mine. So
Thank
you
you,
know,
and I appreciate that.
it's-
It's just, I want to first of all acknowledge that I am a 44-year educator in DC public schools. My mother moved me here to D.C. as a fourth grader from a segregated school system, mainly even after Brown v. Board was decided. Yes, I'm very old. However, what we discovered was a de facto segregated school system in D.C., but I enjoyed teaching in the 9 schools I taught in D.C. and still to this very moment would enjoy teaching in any one of them. However, as a teacher starting out in DC, I discovered that there were other lessons that I had to teach students, mainly because the predominance of my students, 99% of them were African American and poor Black or brown children coming from the lowest income communities. And of course, I never perceived the gap as an achievement gap. I perceived it as an opportunity gap. Because what I noticed, even after Brown v. Board, the white flight from the east of the city to west, basically created a dual school system that existed for wealthy white children and poor Black children who were east of the river. That system still exists. 44 schools have closed in Wards 7 and 8, the wards in which I taught for more than 32 years. And of course, when I ran for president of the Teachers Union, it was basically to continue the work I had done as a teacher in my classroom.
How many closed?
Teaching.
No, I just asked. No, man.
No, it's okay.
No,
not a problem.
No.
44 public schools.
Right,
We started out, no problem.
Yeah.
So we have now 115 public schools remaining in the district. Now, when I speak of quality education, it doesn't matter whether it's a charter or public school. If it's a school that received my tax dollars, I expect it to be transparent and accountable to me as a taxpayer, period. So I really advocate for quality schools, irrespective of whether they are labeled public charter schools or public schools. What I do note that in DC, last week, the report issued by NAEP for DC schools, charter schools were disappointingly very low in their PARCC scores. DCPS outpaced them in every area, language arts and math. That's a good thing. Does it mean that we do not need improvement? Never, because I happen to know what the best performing schools are pre-K through 12 in DC. And every child in each ward in every zip code of the district deserve to have a school like some of those that exist in parts of the city. Public, walkable, right, schools of right. And why do I say schools of right? Because I was basically a supporter of charters. I was at Sousa Middle School, one of the schools involved in the Brown v. Board case for 8 years, Bowling v. Sharp. The students at that school learned about the case when I discovered it was one of the landmark schools. And they also learned that what they had possessed at that time was a school very much like the ones that Black students were relegated to in 1953. Sousa had basically resegregated, deplorable conditions, no librarian, books there from 1953, still for Black students to read in our library. But what I also noticed is that there is a systematic process of focusing on the poorest communities to proliferate charters. In Ward 1, 2, and 3 of the city, when I looked at the map of where charters proliferate in the district, Ward 1, 2, and 3 parents, the wealthiest parents in the district, usually white parents, have said, we will not have charter schools in our communities. We want quality public schools because we pay public tax dollars. And we do not. We want our choice to be quality public schools. It doesn't matter whether charter school exists. And we've had some bad public and charter schools in DC, and they should be closed when they're not up to speed. But what I've noticed is a pattern of systematically starving public schools in certain parts of the city of resources, punishing those schools with a high-stakes test and setting them up for closure. And the pattern has existed. It was outlined in City Paper 2 years ago and again by NCTE, who basically said, if you take a look at the process by which schools have been closed, how those schools have been underfunded for decades, it's one thing to assume that the teachers are just bad. They leave, they're not passionate about what they do. We can't claim that anymore in DC. We have replaced 85% of the teaching force in the last 10 years, since 2007. So we can't, the bad teacher narrative is out. But what I am concerned about is the lack of transparency, the fact that 2 bills are now on the floor of the city council about charter school transparency, which means that 13 council members are saying the lack of transparency is disturbing. the fact that we are paying the same dollars to charter schools as we are to public. When I negotiated a contract for the DC public school teachers, the contract costed, the compensation package was $87 million. In my meeting with the mayor and the city administrator, they indicated that the package would cost over $190 million, which made no sense to me. What they pointed out was, we're going to have to give the same amount to the charter schools. However, the charter schools are not required to use this money to increase teachers' salaries. That's unfortunate, because principals in some of the schools, and all different chains of charter schools are run differently. KIPP Academy charter schools, basically, the curriculum is set up as if it was social engineering for black kids who are poor. Compliance curriculum, teaching students how not to think critically, but simply follow instructions and don't question anything. That's dangerous. So my point is this: irrespective of whether you are a public or a charter school, and both systems are grappling for public dollars that are diminishing, and in the process of that happening, the hatchet above our heads on how public education is being underfunded, and how the current president and Secretary of Education is working to even direct more public dollars from public education to private charters and vouchers, is disturbing, and we should be concerned about that. As an African-American educator, I am well informed on the history of public education in this country, well informed on it. And I want to say this: sometimes what we cite as problems are just a symptom of the greatest problem. If we don't look at 10 years of education in New Orleans after Katrina and what has happened to those schools and children there, and learn the lesson of what has happened there, not take it personally when someone says schools that fail our children should be closed. We should put a moratorium on charters in DC to, first of all, take a closer look at whether or not we need additional schools. Do we need additional buildings? Do we need to take a look at where the students in DC, especially those students who have been underserved, displaced, moved out of the city, how those students are faring?
That's why I asked the question.
Now,
When you said 40, the reason I asked the question about closures,
sure,
is because I wanted to know what was behind the closures. So, for instance, in Chicago, when folks are talking about school closures there, well, Chicago actually has 150,000 fewer students today than they had a decade ago. Mm-hmm. And so, closures in D.C., are those students still here in other schools, or have they migrated to Maryland or Virginia?
Good
What's
question.
the basis of 44 closures?
Good question, and actually it's a combination of both, Roland. We have students who migrated to Maryland because the public housing fund has dried up, so that black folks would have to get out of Dodge. So basically, the relocation of black families in D.C., the gentrification, which has been on steroids in the last 10 years, that is part of the problem. The other is this: charter schools, Sousa Middle School, where I taught the subject of bowling be sharp. I visit teachers in every school each year. The teachers at Sousa were struggling to keep their students, not to keep their students, but to gain new students. And what they shared with me is that around Sousa, 7 charter schools were allowed to open within blocks from their schools. They were informed by the school district, if you want to remain open, you will have to figure out how to get those students back. That's, in my opinion, that is not the role of a teacher. But in certain communities where those charter schools are allowed to grow like that, it is understood that they are going to siphon students from those schools. But what I've also noticed, Roland, is as a teacher at Sousa, who was happy to see that a few students whose families were not happy with their performance or their ability to adapt, moved them into a charter school. On one occasion, a student who said he had been put out of the charter school onto the streets returned to DCPS 60 days later because they did not have the special needs support that student needed. Upon discovering, checking later, that throughout 7 and 8, over 1,800 students per year returned from the charters back to the DC public schools throughout the entire year, but those funds do not follow those students back to the public schools.
Hold on, Margaret. I'm gonna go to Shawn. Because Shawn, I'm going to Margaret, but Shawn, I'm gonna go to you right now. Here's one of the things that, look, I've born and raised in Houston. I've worked in Austin, Fort Worth, Chicago, here. One of the things that I think for a lot of people don't actually understand about education in this country There's no national education policy.
Nope.
Okay? Education in America is a local issue. And so when you talk about what's happening with traditional schools or charter schools, you have different rules based upon different states.
That's right.
And so part of the issue that I've seen in this conversation is that, and I mean, again, over the last several years, is that folks have what I call these very broad, general conversations about traditional schools and about charter schools, when in fact, it varies based upon the state. So we talk about transparency or rules. In Texas is a perfect example. If you have a charter school in Texas, you have 3 years to perform or you're shut down. I know of public schools, that traditional schools that are in where I went to school, that have not been performing for 20 years and still exist. And so the thing that drives me crazy about when we had discussions all across the country is that folks can't think in terms of absolutes, because it's a matter of your particular state, your particular city, the leadership in that city, how those schools are structured, and how the rules are laid out. And I say that for folks, so people say, oh, charters are failures, or this somebody says, charters are a success. Well, that's just broad. The question is exactly what is actually happening. From your vantage point, why was it important for you to create your preparatory academy? And first of all, how many students do you serve?
We are in year 2. We are serving 130 black and brown boys, Ward 7 and 8.
And why did you create it? And was it driven by demand from the public? Was it driven by you looking at how those young boys were performing? What was behind it?
I'm gonna answer that question. I'm like, oh, right, but I'm gonna answer that question because it's a really important question to answer. I think that there's nobody in this room is confused about the condition of performance for African American boys in this country, certainly not in our nation's capital. And the history of that performance is long and clear. And so when I came to this city 10 years ago to support the leadership development of leaders who were doing work across the city, traditional schools as well as public charter schools, I also started doing turnaround work. And I found that while I could go in and do awesome work to turn a school around, right, when I stepped away, right, things could go back to the way that they were. And no matter what way you look at this data, and there's certainly a ton of ways to cut this data, friends, you can cut it to tell whatever story you want it to tell. The story about black boys is the same no matter what way you cut it. Black and brown boys are at the bottom of this thing at a rate that is alarming. And I mean, I think that for the story that we put together for the school that we created, we took DCPS data and DC CAS, their study that they put together for why they started Ron Brown, which was the boys' college prep academy that they have in the district. And it demonstrated that across 8 years of DC CAS performance, we saw that, you know, we say that education doesn't work. For white females, it was doing a wonderful job. Wonderful job. They went from maybe 92 to like 94% performance, right? Where black boys went from 26 to 32% performance. And that kind of gap, right? Looking at, while we have to celebrate that public schools have created so much success for one personality, one type, one demographic within education, we have to also at the same time decry the absolute abysmal and regular failure that it has had, that African American boys. And I agree that it's not really an achievement gap. I think I see it as a service gap. We don't know how to serve these young men, and so they act like the service they're getting. And so it was clear to me that we needed to do something. Going to community meetings and going for a whole year, listening to community members, Roland, get up and talk about black and brown boys in the way that this community talks about these boys. Everybody said several things. One, we needed more middle schools. That was clear. We needed to do something different for boys. That was the language. We need to do something different for boys. And so I went and talked to 450 of them across the nation and asked them, What's going on in schools when you're doing well, and what is going on in schools when you're not doing well? And they had plenty to say, just in case you think boys do not talk. Really, they had plenty to say about school, plenty to say about their experience, and it was clear what they were saying to me. We didn't stop there, though. We went and talked to 150 black and brown men who came from environments very similar to theirs, but who had made it to the other side. And we asked them, what happened that caused you to get from where you were to where you are? And we decided that in between the testimonial of those young boys and the testimonial of those young men was the perfect design for a school. And we built the school based on what they said and backed the research into what they said. We built it from them. Communities are railing in DC in particular because quite often, I mean, we've heard the story of, you know, the charter school movement dropping on a community. You just happen and somebody's innovation just lands on you one day. And I was finding that in the education reform movement, lots of people were showing up at communities and just kind of saying, hey, I've got this idea and it's innovative, right? And what it was is people were creating the program that they could offer, creating the program that they were best able to provide, and then taking it to a community and saying, here it was. We did the exact opposite and went to a community and said, what would this school be doing if it was serving your child? And the parents sounded like the kids. We built that for them. And I think it was it was incredibly important that I do this as a charter school. As I continue to work and develop leaders on both sides, because I continue to do that work this very day, my contemporaries who are working with us and partnering with us in the traditional school system are awed at how fast I can get something done in my school. We need something, we go get it done. This needs to change, we change it. The curriculum's not working, we shift it. Whatever we need to do, we are able to do it on a drop. They are awed at the fact that with the people from the community, I brought them into the community, hired them, paid them, and they're awed at how quickly I could get that done. They're awed at how quickly we can figure out something, that level of flexibility. We want to work with the district to get that level of autonomy and flexibility to their principals.
Right, and so the people, and Margaret, I'm going to you, African Americans who I've talked to who are running charter schools, look, I know many of them who are former traditional public school leaders, and they said, if I had to stay in that system, I was going to leave the industry totally. And that's what jumps out. And so, Margaret, you wanted to jump in here. I just think that's important. And also, it's important to also note why why I say black school choice is the black choice. Let me be real clear. I am advocating for black people to run charter schools. I ain't got if anybody else want to run a school, I'm cool with that. I was in a meeting at the charter school conference, and it was like 30 people in the room, and it was like 2 black people at the table, 1 Latino, and I was talking, my Latino brother, he's like, I believe in inclusion. He said, so I keep hearing black, what about Latino? I said, man, look, you are more than welcome to start school choice is the Latino choice. Roland's here for black people. I was being straight up. And the reason I was being straight up, because you heard Senator Kamala Harris say it last night in the debate when she said, what are the numbers when a black kid has at least 1 black teacher by the 3rd grade, has at least 2 black teachers by the 4th grade, and to Margaret's point, when you said 30+% of your teachers are black, that's why. So you can go ahead.
So first I want to say, Shawn, I want to compliment you on your work and support you in your work. And I want to say that from the standpoint of when black people are doing good work wherever they are, we need to compliment them on their work and support them in their work, because we are doing excellent work in the charter school space, and we are doing excellent work in the traditional public school space. And we need to compliment the work because we're so under attack by our society that it's disheartening when we are under attack by each other. And the other thing I want to say is that it's such a crisis. I mean, in California, 80% of black kids can't do math at grade level, and 68% can't read or write at grade level. And that is all of our crisis to handle. And as I listen to us today, I almost think it's a false choice.
It is.
You know, one of the things I also am, because we all wear many hats, is the education advisor to Al Sharpton's National Action Network Sacramento chapter. And our point of view is that any school that is doing right by black kids and can show results is a school that we support. And I think that as black people, we cannot afford to cut ourselves off from options because we have institutional points of view. And there are many people in this room from California. And what I want to say to Californians in this room is that we have a black chair of the board of the California Charter Schools Association. That's me. We have a black superintendent of public instruction. We have a black chair of the board of the State Board of Education. We have a black president of the California Teachers Association. We have a black executive director of the California School Boards Association. If we stay in our institutional positions, I guarantee you black kids will not be served, because they haven't been served yet with our institutional positions. But if we decided that with Shirley Weber as the chair of the Black Caucus, that we were going to have a meeting amongst ourselves to say on our watch, this is what will happen for black kids, and I don't care if it's in a charter school or a traditional public school, it will happen on our watch. I'm in a charter school space because it allows me to feel free as a black woman to do what I know is right without asking nobody for permission but my board. And because I'm a black woman during the work, I'm telling you, in the first 5 years, actually first 4 years, I had 14 public hearings to hold me accountable. I meet all the same accountability standards in terms of
14 in 1 year?
14 in 4 years.
4 years, got it.
Every trimester, I had a public hearing examining my accountability on my finances, my academics. They examined me to an extent in which all of you are examined if you're in this black skin with me. You're probed and prodded and held accountable to a standard. My parents, I was raised by Southern parents, North and South Carolina, and they said, Margaret, you have to be 100% better than white folks to get the same thing. And the same is true in public life. And so, am I held accountable for my finances, and do I do the same auditing and public reporting as a traditional public school? Absolutely I do. Am I held accountable for my academic achievement on a California dashboard just the same way as other traditional public schools are? Absolutely I am. Am I going to be closed down if I don't meet every single goal I put in my charter school? You betcha. Is it going to happen faster because it's me? And yet still I persist.
So in order for the conversation to move forward, we have to set certain parameters. And the truth cannot become a casualty. We have to accept the fact that charter schools don't just happen. They're not just dropped upon you like a witch with a house. They occur because our community has had enough. This is still a democracy, which I find troubling to watch our friends who are Democrats fight for a woman's right to choose whether or not to have a child, but not where to send that child to school. Fight for universal health care with choice, but no choice as to where you send your child to school. It is unconscionable and inherently dishonest to make this about anything other than the fact that we're talking about jobs. It's not about performance, because if we set a cut score for all schools that fell underneath it, all schools and shut every single one down that was beneath it and kept everyone open that was above it, then we wouldn't be having this conversation at all. So it's not about that. It's not about transparency. In order to get a charter school open in almost every place in the country, you have to first have a state legislature put forward a bill that will even allow for such a thing to occur, which ain't easy. Then you follow that up by multiple processes in which you have to go before board after going to the community to prove that there's even an interest in your school. We're not even talking about parity here. If the traditional schools ran in the same way that the charter schools ran, so many more would be shut down, not just because people left, but because they did not meet the basic expectations. Do not talk about transparency unless we're going to talk about it both ways. Transparency is a word that we use, we throw around, people don't even know what it means. We have to submit our financials every single month. Our daily attendance goes to the city and state to make sure whether or not the kids are coming. See, when we're gonna have a conversation, let's have the real conversation. If someone was just to say, hey man, can y'all just make sure that you make your schools unionized so we can collect these dues off of these kids' backs? I would say, then let's have that conversation. But, because we ain't playing around no more, because these are real black children's lives. If it is what it is, let's call it what it is. Ain't nobody telling anybody in this room, middle-class black people, where to send our kids to school. So I ain't gonna tell poor black people where they can send their kids to school, just to make sure that we can stay in the middle class. So here's what it is. Let's have an honest conversation. If you support all schools, then support all schools. Don't run campaigns against individuals who support charter schools. If you support all schools, don't take every single teacher's union dues to use them to run against charter schools and to create more and more barriers for us. Don't say you support all schools until you support all schools. And so at the end of the day, I'm not talking about supporting schools, I support parents. As a man who was born on his mother's 16th birthday, the third generation in public housing, whose father was in prison by the time he was in high school, whose two brothers have been to prison, I understand that when our families do not have choice, they don't have choice. And up to this point, generations who came before us had versions of choice. They had things that augmented their experience. They had upward bound programs, they had after school programs, they had church programs, they did something, but that wasn't enough. The reason why 1,194 children applied to just one of my schools in 1 year without printing a single brochure, without going to a single church to talk about it, is because they got tired. And isn't that a revelatory experience when black people get tired? And what they're tired of is saying, I just want my son to go to a school where I know at the end of the day he's gonna come home one day better prepared.
May I, so Steve, thank you for that. And of course, I want you to know that union dues are paid from teacher salaries, not on the backs of students, just to correct you on that.
No,
Okay,
they are.
not just the point I made.
No,
not,
if you're
not
gonna
for
say it,
comment,
say it straight.
Not for comment, just to let you know. The fact is, and from territory to territory, state to state, just people have different experiences with charters. And I mean, you know, when you speak broadly as if your experience is the national experience, you can't speak for the experience that parents and teachers and students are having in DC. I'm speaking for DC right now, and I know that there are wonderful charter schools. I used to teach in one of the first charter schools in the district, run by passionate instructional leaders who were good. So I don't really care what school is. The individuals who manage those schools have got to have an interest in the students in those schools and not there to simply get a job. Now, I do know that some of our charters in DC, principals are paid $185,000, teachers are paid $56,000. I don't know how that factors out in terms of the value of teaching, but my experience here with transparency, and I don't use the word loosely, the fact that the city council has basically pushed forth 2 pieces of legislation simply asking charter schools to be transparent, meaning that I can FOIA any information I want on teacher certification, graduation rates, test scores. That happens, and both school systems should be open to public meetings. They should be open to being FOIA'd. The pushback, even by some of our politicians to protect charters from being FOIA'd, makes me suspect. If you're doing a great job, there is nothing for you to hide. You would want to be transparent. So the pushback from the charters in this school district, I don't know where Steve is, and I understand Margaret's points about her passion for running schools. The experience of students in those schools that are led by quality instructional leaders who care about children will make the difference in terms of what service those children get. We have charter schools who are run by management organizations, 10 Square, and they are paid extreme amounts of money to do so. Cesar Chavez here in the district, $1.5 million to manage 3 schools, and the teachers are earning under. Those teachers are demoralized. Now, as far as being unionized, I could care less whether teachers are unionized or not. I've worked in schools that were not unionized. But the point is this: all schools should have quality teachers, quality instructional leaders, teachers that are certified to teach in content areas that they're teaching, and they should be open to public meetings and being FOIA'd.
Can I ask a question?
I'm gonna.
Those 3 schools you mentioned that the management organization running, what's the performance of those schools? Not the salaries. What's the student performance?
The student, I don't have the information on the student performance.
Here's why I'm asking. Here's why I'm stating that. Because if we're going to have discussions about, well, a group's getting this and this and this, I still want to know what's the performance.
Well, the performance, I'll answer that.
Because
Let me say this, Roland.
at the end of the day, for me, that's what it boils down to.
Here,
what's the performance
you're right,
of the
and I want to
students?
finish my statement. Naturally, because the schools were not slated for closure, they apparently have been doing well. The reason one of the schools was slated for closure is because the teachers won their rights to bargain. Immediately after that, they began negotiating their contract, and within months following that, they were slated to be closed. Not for the performance of students, but simply because the teachers had won their rights to bargain. Now, those schools, I'm sure the students were doing well. None of those schools were closed because of poor performance. 3 of them. But my point is, the FOIA Act, open meetings, transparency, the reporting of data to OSSI, the state superintendent in DC, all schools in the district and in any jurisdiction, any state, should be responsible for reporting that information to the public and should not be afraid of being FOIA'd.
So, Shawn, you're here.
Yeah, in
Okay.
Washington, D.C., and have supported some 12 charter schools over the last 10 years. As a matter of fact, some 15, 20. And it is difficult for me because I want to be extremely respectful of the experience that Elizabeth has in this space. She is certainly a noted figure. I am concerned that some of the figures that are coming at you all they're difficult for me. I mean, I've been here 10 years and I didn't know all that stuff she's talking about.
Which
and so I'm
figures
gonna
are
leave
you
it alone.
referring-
I'm gonna
could you
leave. This is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna leave it alone.
Could you
And this is
ask
what I'm
which
going to
figures
do.
are you
I think
referencing?
it is very important for me to say this. Every child who goes to my school is coming from a school where a parent said their child was not being served. Every single one of them.
So
I met with them. I went to their community. I spoke to them, the churches, walked there. And there are some public schools, some traditional public schools, who called us and said, we think this young man will be helpful. We think you should have him too. 30% of our students are students with disabilities. We are over 50% at-risk students.
and of course, your school has the support force,
we had almost no suspensions last year for these young men.
and you are speaking,
Over 95% attendance. We can't get black boys to go to school in this city. Over 95% attendance.
You are speaking
all
of
of
schools.
all of our parents, everybody who we found out lived in the city and
Does
didn't live
that
someplace,
represent
they
every
all
charter-
came back.
May I ask you
No,
this question?
and I will say,
does that represent every charter school? in DC?
absolutely, it does not.
well,
But if schools were being opened and closed based on performance, half the schools in the city would shut down tomorrow. Tomorrow, half of them. Now, I love this city because Washington, D.C. offers an ecosystem of choice, unlike I've seen in many cities, where parents have the kinds of options that we would hope people would have, right? We're actually trying to increase that option. The reason why we are in Ward 7 and Ward 8, and I wrote a charter that said 7 or 8 or bust, we don't open unless we go to 7 or 8, is because that's where the kids with most of the issues are. We're not there because we are proliferating a community with charters. We're there because that community is saying, yo, over here if you want to serve black boys. Right. And there are some parents who do not have the capacity to put their kids on a train, on a bus, and send them across the city. We have opened a school for black boys in Ward 7 and 8, and we have one of the first schools where parents are sending their kids from the West over to our school because everybody knows that boys are struggling. And so I want to focus on the fact that we have a city that actually has quite a healthy ecosystem of choice. And I argue constantly that it's not really choice because all parents can't get to it. It's not a choice if you can't get your, if more, my school would be boiling over with kids if they could get to the school.
That's why I want to deal with.
And Shawn, I just
because
want to speak to one issue.
I work with the folks at Sosa. Some of those parents over there.
My time was cut into Roland drastically,
Elizabeth,
and I did not
Elizabeth,
finish my point.
Elizabeth,
because then I'm aware.
Elizabeth, I'm going to come to you.
I just want to make one point. The standardized test results for all of the schools in D.C.
Public.
No, honey. No. Both public and charter.
Public.
Both public
You can go online today, get them all.
You know what? And I question. I would,
Get them all, get every single one of
You
them.
would let me finish? Because your data, I'm basing it on the data from the Office of the State Superintendent of Education.
Got you.
The report was released last week on the 20th of September.
That's right.
Basically, it's on August, sorry.
Yes.
20th of August. The standardized test results for both charters and public schools in D.C.
That's right.
Read the report. Charter schools basically underperformed in every category of public schools. Is that saying that public schools are kicking up dirt? No, not totally. But they outperform charter schools.
Hold on. I'm not
doubting.
Put a pin in that right there.
Yeah.
And this is the point what I have been saying. Because what you're actually doing is what I started off by saying that we shouldn't do. This is what we should be saying. What are the high-performing traditional schools? Mm-hmm. What are the high-performing charter schools? Let's replicate both of those as opposed to this game of, well, we're actually overall outperforming you overall. What I'm saying is take the best of here and the best of here and create a school system that then says, you know what? So for the failing charters and the failing traditionals, we're going to raise them up. It is a waste of time to keep having this silly ass debate on, well, no, so us collectively is better than you collectively. And I've said, and let me be real clear, I said the same thing to folks in the ed reform movement. Don't come at me talking about charters overall are best because there are some charters that suck. Mm-hmm. There are some people in charter schools that got no business being in this movement.
Yep.
The charlatans should be run out.
Yep.
And I said, look, there are people in journalism that ain't got no business being in it. I want to run their ass out too. Mm-hmm. But I'm sick and tired of traditional school supporters, teachers unions, administrators, and I'm sick and tired of charter school supporters supporting bullshit.
I do.
There should be one standard.
I would just say
learning?
one thing about DC in particular. My focus is always going to be on Ward 7 and Ward 8, right? That is where the preponderance of families who've been impacted by poverty live in trauma, right? I would say go over to 7 and 8 and look at the schools in 7 and 8 and look at charter schools in 7 and 8 and traditional schools in 7 and 8. And let's look at that because if you just aggregate it all and we take the public schools where all the wealthy white kids are going to mix it all in together and say, well, we're doing a little bit better. We're doing a little bit better. The truth is all of us are doing real bad when it comes to black and brown boys.
And here's what I want for Shawn.
And so we got to be, and I don't want to argue the point because I know we can get real nuanced, and I don't want to do that.
Shawn, I want to go back. Shawn, how many students do you serve?
130.
130. Now, this is what I don't understand. This is just me. If I'm serving 130 and kicking y'all behind, he should get 300. And if he got 300 and still kicking y'all behind, I ain't got no problem sending 300 more his way. This is what I say, I don't care who it is. If you a traditional school and you kicking that charter's butt, guess what? No parent gonna send their kid to the charter because you kicking butt. But if the traditional ain't doing a job, I ain't got no problem
And
saying,
our
"Give Shawn
authorizer
more."
will shut us down.
And
They will shut us down.
may I add,
If
Roland,
districts
that the
in the
point-
if
I'm gonna
district
get a point in
if
from the West
traditional
Coast.
schools were being shut down,
Shawn, Margaret, Elizabeth.
if district schools were being shut down in the way that charter schools are shut down for performance, this would be a very different discussion. But that's not what's happening. I get 5 years to show and prove. And I went into a community and took the most difficult demographic of service in that community and opened a school for that group. I get 5 years like everybody else. There are people in this room who told us we weren't going to get it done. So 5 years, and if it doesn't work, we get shut down. How long does the school down the street that was arguing that we not open get to be open with the same kids? The parents ran over to me to put them in our school. Like, how long have they been providing the service that they provide?
Margaret, then Elizabeth.
So I want to offer a vantage point on something a little different than we're talking about here. And that is this. In my flagship school, 66% of our kids are reading and writing and doing mathematics at grade level. 66% of our kids. And my school is majority African American, low income, and Latino. Black and Latino school outperforming the state by leaps and bounds. We've replicated our schools and been able to replicate our practices and our results. In the 11 years that I've been CEO of my school system, there have been 6 or 7 superintendents of the Sacramento City Unified School District, which is the #1 district that my kids otherwise would have went to. One of the things that the county superintendent said when a couple of school board members came up and said, well, you should delay the decision on approving the location of Margaret's next school because it may drain resources from the district if the kids from the neighborhood decide to go there. He said, the board set aside that argument and went ahead and approved the schools, to their credit. But one of the points that the county superintendent made was, why is it that you haven't gone over to Margaret and asked how she's getting her results? You know her, you have her cell phone number, and I'm sure she would open her doors, which I would. And in fact, I run a teacher preparation program for over 60 public school districts in California, and I teach the teachers who come on their own to earn their credentials through us how we do what we do. But there's far too little dialogue between school districts and charter schools who do this work to a level of excellence. Now, there are some doing that work. There's replication grants, there's sharing best practices grants, but we spend far more time debating who gets to do the work rather than learning from those who do it well, regardless of what system they work in. And in fact, our system writes books about, we don't study the misery statistics about how poorly black people do. We seek out the success wherever it is and say, how can we replicate that? Now, to Elizabeth's point, and this is why, underscoring Roland's point, education is local. All those things she's talking about is that you should have transparency, meaning you should have open meetings. Absolutely you should, and in California you're required. You shouldn't have conflicts of interest on your board. Absolutely you shouldn't, and in California it's required. You should have transparency in your finances. Absolutely you should, and so in California it's required. In California we don't even have for-profit charter schools. So a lot of, but the problem is...
We don't have any in D.C.
And in
None in
fact,
New
they
York.
are against the law in California.
None in Connecticut, none
so
in
the,
New York.
So the difficulty is no distinction is made when we're having these debates, not only nationally, but in the state. In the state of California, when these debates are had, there's no distinction made between what rules are in place and what are not. It's just these sound bites distilled down to the sound bite. The next thing I want to come to is about Biden's performance in the debate yesterday and what he said about education. In particular, what he said about black parents. Now, I was watching the commentary on MSNBC, and what they raised about what he said about black parents was that he was out of touch because he talked about teaching your kids to read by playing the
Record player.
the record player. And so what the mainstream commentators took away from his comment was to say, isn't he out of touch because he talked about the record player? Well, perhaps so. But the thing that was more troubling to me was the characterization of black parents that we don't know how to care for our own children. And that because we don't know how to care for our own children, we need to send social workers in. Now, I support social workers, and some of us do need some social workers. But some of us don't. And my parents are the toughest customers that come, and they care deeply about their kids, and they monitor us like white on rice. And they hold us accountable for how their children are doing, and yes, they are low income, and yes, they are black. But we cannot allow, as a black community, the leading presidential candidate to say what the problem is with what's going on with the legacy of slavery and black education is, well, they don't really understand how to take care of their own children, so we need to teach them better.
They need a record player.
Thank you.
We should all be outraged about that. And outraged from the standpoint of how we hold people accountable. The takeaway from that comment is not that he's out of touch because of the record player. It's that he's out of touch because of the characterization of black parents. And he may very well be the best candidate to beat Trump, and trust me, I'm all about that. But whoever has access to him in this room needs to correct him on that.
Oh, trust me.
So I want.
Trust me, they got that text this morning from me.
Thank you.
Elizabeth,
And
go
so
ahead.
Roland, you and Margaret both
Trust me.
confirmed the purpose and the original purpose of charter schools, which was to take the best from one system to help grow the other. And of course, to adopt policies, best practices from both systems. So initially, that's how charter schools started out. And of course, the national trend to move this, well, I should say an agenda to privatize education, in my view, is the larger issue, because charters, vouchers, when I look at what the Trump administration is doing right now and the Secretary of Education is doing with how they're funding, where they want the funds to be diverted, it confirms for me what the plan is on a national movement. And I know from state to state, we're going to have different experiences about charters. We have good ones and bad ones. We have good leaders and bad leaders. We have good teachers and bad teachers. And wherever we have the bad, we need to correct it and address it, name it, and not be afraid to. I'm not going to assume that because charter schools are playing out well in one jurisdiction that they're doing okay here in DC. I'm not going to assume that if one if all of them are doing poorly, that I want to acknowledge that. But if they're doing well, we acknowledge that also. I did say before that some of the best charters began here in the district. My point is to check them, ensure that they are transparent in reporting what's happening in their schools, because the shiny new buildings does not impress me. I'm interested in what's going on inside, whether or not the instructional leaders in those schools have good intentions for the children that they serve, whether they care about them. And I know that our schools are not for-profit, but some of them are run by for-profit organizations. And the focus is not on the students, but becomes the money. So in DC, we do not have the same policies that you may have, Margaret, in California. We have some issues here around transparency for the last 3 decades. And it's time for us to address it. The lack of reporting by charters who open, we've had, I don't know how many charters have closed, but a one chain of charters closed here in DC. There were 3 schools. When those students were left hanging out there, their parents had to find schools to get them in. And it created a lot of instability for families who were already dealing with instability.
Which is why I need
Roland,
black
Roland,
people.
may I finish my
But
point?
I'm supporting your point, which is
Come on,
why
sis.
this is why, Elizabeth,
I would like
we
to
need
comment.
black
I know, but finish
people
is taking a long
at the
time. It's a panel,
hold
not
on.
a
But
presentation, sis.
Elizabeth, this is why. This is why we
It's
need.
a half an
hold
hour
on one
for
second.
you.
This is why we need black people, black parents, black legislators, folks working in unions, at the outset of when rules are created to say what's best for our children. That's, again, though, because see, here's when you said when charters were initially created, first of all, there's no system in America that was actually created for black people that was meant to work. That's first. Ain't no system. Okay, Randy Weingart was on my show, and she said,
it's working how it's intended.
Right.
Exactly how
I
it was
had
intended to
Randy
work.
Weingart on my
Criminal
show, and she
justice
said
system's
charters
working.
were created and they were segregated. I was like, well, hell, the school system was segregated, Randy. So what's your point? What I'm saying is the problem here, which goes to what Steve is saying, and because here's the deal, we really want to be honest, and I've traveled this country. Black politicians who oppose charters, their kids are in private school. Hold up.
All of them?
Hold up. First of all, brother, let me say it again. I just said it. I have traveled this country. The significant number, if you go across this country, black caucuses across America,
Walk the
and
building, brother.
do the poll. Black civil rights leaders. Hold up. I can go, brother, hold up. Again, you talking to somebody who's traveled this country, who has sat across the table from them. When I ran the Chicago Defender, when they came in to get my support, because I was the one who decided who we endorsed, I would ask the question, where do your kids go? But the reality is, no, they don't. It's a significant number of them, because you know why? Because they have means. And what I'm saying is, you got to ask the question. If there's a black politician that's opposing it,
Brother.
ask them the question, where do your kids go?
Brother,
And
you
if
don't
they
even have to
kids
go that
don't go
far.
to public school, you should say, why not?
Brother,
Steve,
you don't even have to go that far. All you have to do is
larger
ask
issue
many of the
because in-
teachers themselves, do
Hold
you
on.
send your
Look, I'm
children to the school that you work in?
You can also
And you will
ask
find
number
the
of charter
overwhelming
school operators where they
majority.
send their children.
Well, ask me, because ask me, I'll tell you where I send them to my school.
Kip
So,
Academy.
and
Hold on,
only send them to my
Wealthy.
school. Well, come
Hold on.
on, sis, we
Steve
didn't come here
Elizabeth.
just to hear you
Steve
speak. You
Elizabeth.
gotta check.
And
You
we
gotta
did not come
come.
here just to
One
hear you
second,
speak.
one second.
keep giving
One second,
unlimited time,
Steve
please.
Elizabeth. Steve Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Go.
Please be respectful.
Go.
We have, when you talk about, and I do believe that we brought ourselves back down into the weeds, this issue is much larger than where any individual chooses to send their child. My point is this.
No.
Excuse me, Steve. There is a larger issue around privatization that I think all of us need to be focused on. I'm happy to see that charter schools can grow anywhere in any state. But the larger agenda, Roland, on privatization is dangerous, in my opinion, without having a public school system.
Here's my question.
I want to finish this, Roland. I'd like to finish
I gotta
the
ask you a
same way.
question.
May I finish
wanna
my
ask you a
statement?
question.
May I
What
finish
is
my
the percentage of children in America? Hold up.
I could not tell
Elizabeth,
you the
ask it.
percentage. And
What
if
is
you
the
know, let me know.
percentage of children in America who attend traditional public schools?
I would not know that number, and if you do, please share
It is what? 94%?
It is 94%.
Oh, hold on, one second. Hold up. Again, I need you to hear what we just said. The number of students who attend traditional public schools is 94%. The number of students that attend charter schools is 6%. Please explain to me how the 6% is creating the problems of the 94.
We're not talking about the
You're saying
percentage.
privatization. We're saying privatization. Hold up. We're saying privatization, and I can show you school board members.
Roland,
I can show you
Roland,
school board.
Can we go to the national? Can we go to?
No, hold up.
All right.
Right there's a school board member. I can show you school board members of traditional public schools who will tell you honestly that privatization is existing in traditional schools based upon contracts. Who has the textbook contract? Who has the food services contract?
Yeah.
Who has the construction contract?
and I
So
never
we
said-
want to talk
Yeah.
privatization and
And the
money.
outplacement of
let's
children.
talk about
And
public
I did not
dollars.
restrict it. I did not restrict
Go ahead.
privatization.
All right.
I
Go
did
ahead,
not
Elizabeth, go
restrict.
ahead.
I
Elizabeth
did
and
not
Steve.
restrict privatization only to charter schools. I simply said it is a threat to democratic policies, and it is, and it will continue to be. So whether
Yes,
you
right now.
Roland, may I finish? Whether you acknowledge that or not, I'm
I
looking
do.
at from the top down, and of course what we see happening in New Orleans right now with the charter school system that exists there. If we use the New Orleans school system, Roland, as a model for what could happen for the country, you would know the charter
No
school
one is
system.
doing that.
Can we?
No, the charter school
All right.
system there has
Can I-
been an abysmal failure, especially for
That's
black
just not
children.
true. Like you just can't make up facts.
It was an
Yes,
abysmal
no, I'm not
failure.
making up facts.
You are.
Steve, go ahead.
When,
Steve,
when
go
it-
ahead.
When it's convenient for you, you talk about D.C. But when it's not convenient for you, you try to make it a national conversation.
Well, anyone in this room.
No. You already made your point. You made your point. You made your point.
In this
Elizabeth,
room
You made your point. You made your
Hold on,
point and it
Elizabeth.
fell down.
Steve.
You made your point and it fell down. So
Hold
let's
on,
keep it
Elizabeth.
moving.
The New Orleans
So
schools-
now what we're gonna talk about is this.
Hold on. Hold
So-
on.
so-
Hold on.
I don't think so. If you call
Hold
that a
on.
successful
Elizabeth,
school
hold
system,
on. Steve,
So-
make your point.
So let us be honest.
Hold on.
It's not as if before charter schools started in Washington, D.C., that the traditional public schools were lighting on fire.
Okay,
Let's just be honest.
Steve, go ahead.
No, you
Elizabeth,
can't.
Could you tell me in your own words, Steve? Do
Elizabeth,
see
you
the-
wanted
the
me to
current-
quiet Steve down. Hold on.
Okay. I just
Steve,
wanted-
finish your point.
I want to ask him one question.
No, hold up. You didn't want to let him ask you a question.
Okay,
Show-
fine.
Steve,
Show
Steve,
didn't.
finish
I
your
will.
point. I'm going to come back. Steve, finish your point.
So here's the point. There are a couple union tropes that they use as often as they can. One is privatization. And they use this term as if it actually means something. It doesn't. Not a damn thing.
Wow.
We are a not-for-profit organization. And if you
Steve, go.
there's a simple understanding here. There are things that are municipal. Those are all referred to as public. Everything else in the world is private. That means the United Way, United Negro College Fund, many colleges. You wouldn't have a problem sending your child to a private college. So we're not even having an honest conversation. What we do is we shift this conversation away from what it is. I started here, I will end here. This is about black people and self-determination, choosing the schools that are best for their children. You, me, and nobody else should be part of that conversation. It is one of the most personal and important decisions that you will ever make. Not to which college your child goes to or graduate school, but what kindergarten your child goes to, what middle school. And no one here to protect anybody's jobs has the right to stand in the way of anyone in this room determining where their child goes to school. And so when Roland asked the question, where do you send your child to school? That tells me I would not go to a Muslim's house and expect him to serve me up pork. I would not go to a vegetarian's house and ask them to serve me up meat. Don't serve me something that you don't eat. If you don't use these services, do not expect me to use them. I am simply expecting that the members of the Congressional Black Caucus, that the members of any of our local black caucuses, where do you send your child to school? All I want for my parents, many of whom come from some of the poorest parts of the United States of America, is to have the same access as the people who they put in place to represent them. This is not about traditional schools versus charter schools. It's about one thing, self-determination for black people, which is rooted in nothing more than where you choose to send your child to school. And I do not understand how anyone could disagree with that.
I do want to bring in Shawn. I got it because I got to bring him in here because you did something that, again, has to be amplified. You said you went to the people. And the people responded.
Yeah.
Steve, when you ran the school in Connecticut, the waiting list was how long?
So the first school that we ran, the waiting list was 2,700. The local traditional school system, because I worked in Hartford Public Schools as a Hartford Public School employee and union member for 10 years, they wouldn't allow us to expand the school, despite the fact that one out of every 6 kids in the city applied to our school. There was a school just 2 blocks up the street in which only 2 children in the entire 8th grade could do math on grade level. In that school that we were running, 96% of the children could read on grade level, and 84% could do math on grade level.
How could you be against that?
We had an inverted achievement gap. That means the black kids outperformed the white kids, but our largely black and Latino and Democratic school board refused to allow us to expand in our own community. So we went to another one, opened up 2 more schools, and now we're opening one in Harlem. We got one open in Harlem, we're gonna open one in Bronx, in the poorest zip code in the United States of America. So we came to go to the communities where our children need access to a quality education. And I'm telling you this, one of the reasons why we don't do open houses as a thing, and why we never did one of those public lotteries where you have the balls go up, is because my heart cannot stand to watch black people and their children begging to get into a goddamn school. just because the one that they know that they're zoned to is not going to educate them. How dare anyone in this room have the audacity to force a child into failure just to keep the jobs, just to keep the system in place? This that we're doing is wrong. It is wrong in an epic way, and dare no one stand for that. This system is not broken. It's magnificently put together by the same people who created the criminal justice system. They created the same system with the same results. So if you don't support the criminal justice system and you know it's inherently racist, God, what do you think is happening to your goddamn schools? Our kids are being destroyed by a system that was not meant to serve them. Here you have black people saying enough is enough. Our school's theme is social justice. We teach black power in our classrooms. We don't ask permission from anybody to teach anything, ever. From math to science, we don't have to worry about what anybody tells us, and you can come to our publicly held board meetings of our 100% black board and ask the questions, because that's self-determination.
Thank you.
I'm going down. First of all, I got this. This ain't my first rodeo. So no, excuse me. When Steve was interrupting her, I stopped Steve. When she was yes, hold up. Let me help y'all. Hold up.
Right.
Let me help all y'all out.
Can we
We live streaming this. We can roll it back now.
I would.
Hold up.
Look.
So hold up.
All right.
So the mouth crowd can keep my mouth. I got this. Now here's what's about to happen. I'm going down this line. Do y'all object? I got this. No, hold up. Well, don't sit and tell me how to moderate.
have two questions
Now,
for,
hold on.
two questions
Margaret
for
has been
Steve.
waiting. I'm going to go Margaret. I'm going Elizabeth. I'm going to go Shawn, Steve, final
You
comment.
kind of started with Shawn.
No, I know
you
that,
went
but
over to Steve and.
No, I know that,
Okay.
but I changed it.
Yes, you
So,
did.
I did.
Actually, he kind of started
So,
with it.
Yes, you did.
I'm coming back Margaret. Margaret, go right ahead.
Steve has the prime time.
So I
No,
just,
no,
I wanted to say this
Elizabeth, you've been
as a
talking
local
too. Nice
example,
try.
another example of self-determination of black people. And first of all, my school's a public school, and so it's open to all students. And 25% of our students are Latino. Over 60% are African American. But I make no bones about the fact that my schools were created to close the African American achievement gap, because there was a finding of fact in my county that all 13 of the school districts in Sacramento County had a severe and persistent African American achievement gap, such that there was no place where black parents could go in the county and not confront it. And the only group of students that black students in my county and in the state of California consistently outperform are students with special needs. That's why my school system came into existence. And we
Okay, I
have
need you to repeat
created,
that.
there is no,
The black kids.
the only
pe-
group of students that our black students outperform are students with special needs. We're the lowest performing subgroup other than that. And that was a
In the whole
finding.
state.
In the whole state,
Got
that's
it.
true. And in my county, that's true. And the county board made a finding of fact on the record and went around to the community and shared the data with the community in our community centers, to the point where black people were shocked. And they were saying, "Are you employed with the county?" "Yes." "And you're telling me this?" "Yes." "Is this a trick?" "No." This is what the data is. Because of the action of that courageous board that took action on February 1st, we intentionally brought our petition to the board on the first day of Black History Month. That meeting ended on the second day of Black History Month, and nobody left the room. It just took that long for Sacramento to decide to do something for black kids. But even when we talk about doing something for black kids, it's for everybody. And that's why 25% of the kids in my school are Latino, even though I say, "Hey folks, we're gonna solve the African American achievement gap up in here, and we're gonna do it together." But what the result is, with these 7 schools that I've opened, in partnership with the Black Press, where we've named our schools after living local African American community icons, people from our own community who represent the best of us, people like Alan Rowe, who created a program called the United College Action Network, and he's gotten 15,000 black kids to historically black colleges with the scholarship dollars to follow. Those are the types of people that we name our schools after. We have created an ecosystem for the black community in my schools, where all the major black community civic organizations are engaged in meaningful ways and joyful about it. What is happening concurrently is that our Black Parallel School Board is suing the school district for educational malpractice against black special needs kids. There is a severe dichotomy between what's the dialogue happening in my schools, which everybody is welcome to participate in our public meetings that are noticed just like a school district, and the dialogue happening in the traditional public schools. The shots in the press in the traditional public schools of black parents coming out of board meetings, they're angry. My parents, I just had over 200 of them at a parent academy to talk about, now what are the details about how black folks who have been successful in sending their kids to and through college, what do they do? Attendance, understand the Common Core, understand the disciplinary procedures, social and emotional learning. Nobody asked me today, but I'm going to tell you anyway how we've gotten our results. We spend a lot of time on teacher professional development. We have been shipping our folks back and forth to New York because we sought out the schools that serve the same demographic but do a better job than we do. And we've been consistently engaged in professional development with those teachers. They flew out to my school and said, you know, we really love, Margaret, that your kids greet folks when they come to the door. That's really charming. But if you don't increase your rigor game, they're never going to meet the academic goals that you have for them. So why don't you try this curriculum? It's based on Engage New York for the mathematics, but we've already tweaked it and pressure tested, and this is better. We send our teachers and our administrators all over the country to get the best professional development from people who do better than we are. And it's a humbling experience, but it's a part of, I think, Roland, what should be the experience of academics. We learn from each other.
Which happens in sports.
Which happens in sports.
I mean, literally, in sports, college teams go to the University of Alabama to sit under Nick Saban to see how he runs his practices. So it's amazing how we have no problem with our schools winning state championships in football and basketball and studying from the best. But then when it comes to actually academics, we say, we really shouldn't try that. We know what's best. Elizabeth, then Shawn, then Steve. Go ahead.
For the record, Roland, our union launched a citywide campaign to adequately fund the public schools in D.C., and we asked for an additional $35 million to be added to the budget, specifically for schools in Wards 7 and 8, based on a formula that we calculated and a return of public school students from the charters back to the public each year. From 18 to 2000, we basically calculated that by the per pupil expenditure to come up with the $35 million. The city came up with an additional $10 million as a result of our campaign. The second point I want to make, for anyone in this country, particularly in education, that does not understand the impact of privatization on education in this country and internationally, it's got to be out of touch. It is about more than whether or not you send your child to a private or public school. Privatization is basically about just diverting public dollars to private interests. Education in particular is the example that I am most interested in and focus my attention on. I look at school districts, and I mention New Orleans because we have recruited several teachers from the New Orleans School District who talk about the quality of education in the charter school system that exists in New Orleans now, and it's attempting to exist in Puerto Rico, where basically after disasters happen, you have privatizers and profiteers going in and basically taking over the public entities or the public agencies. And education has been my focus. And as an African American educator, I'm always going to advocate for a quality public school system, irrespective of what other systems exist aligned with it. As an educator in this school district, as a student who attended school here, I know the significance of having a quality public school for all students, ones that cannot cherry pick and sort students, one that cannot send them back because they don't have the services. And I do know that some charters serve all students well, but there are some who don't. And I happen to know that because I was a teacher who received many of those students back into my classroom. So I just want to be mindful of students and protecting the rights of students everywhere. I don't want my rights as a teacher to ever trump students' rights or quality instruction for students. But I don't want us to overlook the larger picture either. I mean, these little battles we're having down in the weeds about who's best, who's not, who's doing well, who's outperforming, we have got to look at the larger picture. And above our heads, there is a national, an international agenda to privatize education. Interesting enough in DC, in US, the Trump administration, the president that has basically put more effort into privatizing public education, more effort in taking public education dollars and diverting it to private needs, vouchers, and charters. We've got to be really careful as people of color, as particularly as African Americans, whether or not we're going to retain and protect a public education system in this country, the only one that is, by Constitution, required to educate all children. All children. Thank you.
I think that's very fair, and I don't think anybody who comes to our school will say that we do anything other than educate all children. We have a demographic of kids who outpace some of the difficulties that we see at most of the area schools, the traditional schools that surround us. I also appreciate that we do need to think seriously about what it means to privatize schools. I'm certainly not a private school. There's nothing private about what we do. We are very public. We also spent most of our time talking to a community and allowing that community to tell us what should happen in their schools. And I think that is something that has pushed me into this space, and I think I'll kind of end with this. I trust our parents. I trust these parents. I trust these parents regardless of the fact that many of them were poor. I trust these parents, regardless of the fact that many of them have come from extreme trauma and are experiencing that trauma right now, many of them, right? I trust these parents who have experienced recalcitrant poverty for years and years and years and years. I trust these parents. I trust them to choose a school that is best for their kids, and they keep doing it. As fast as we open the schools, they fill up. As fast as we open the schools, they fill up. As fast as the seats become available, they get taken. These parents are somehow, through all of the difficulty of trying to figure out all of the lies they're being told by both sides, lies, through all of the cloud of confusion, they keep, all the kids who signed up for our school this year, well, I talked to Miss So-and-so, and she said her son was in SPED, and you taught him how to read, so I'm bringing my son over here. I'm bringing my son over here. Please, Mr. Hardnett, just, whatever you can do, I don't know. We've been through 5 different schools. Traditional and charter schools, in and out, and it has not worked. But something over here about what you all are doing every day, my son comes home, he's happy. My son has never been happy to go to school. He is happy to come to school every day. I trust our parents, and I don't want to treat our parents like babies who can't make decisions, and we got to make all the decisions for them. We make the choices available to them, we let them shop and figure it out, and they keep landing where they land. I think that if we can remember that it's more than it is a discussion about privatization, it is a discussion about the recalcitrant problem of just failure. And I struggle to say failure of our children, but the failure that our children have experienced, the failure that has been thrust upon them over and over for decades. That is what I am interested in. I'm more interested in that. And I'm going to continue to do the work, because what I continue to find is that me and traditional school principals, we get together and talk and figure out what we're going to do together. And we let people who have all these big arguments have them, because we have been collaborating. We have been sharing. There's plenty going on in DCPS that I still am trying to learn from, and plenty of their leaders and teachers who are sneaking into our building to figure out what we're doing so they can take it back home and make it work for them. We got to focus our attention on that. And the opportunity that we have in the charter space to have Black and brown leaders come into this space and build small businesses that serve our children, Even though they're not private businesses, they're businesses. I'm running a budget. I'm making decisions about black and brown and female entrepreneurs who are coming into the building and providing service for us, right? We have control of those dollars. We need to make sure that we capitalize on the opportunity that is in front of us to, one, serve our children, but we're also serving our community doing this. We're employing people.
I'd like to thank all of the members of the panel for your passion and thoughtful debate. I'd also like to thank all the people who came out this evening. You know, as Jay-Z says, you could have been anywhere, but you've been here. Protect what? When we start talking about protecting the public education system, what are we protecting? This is a system that has failed black people. We can talk about romantic stories of bygone days, but in 1954, Brown came down and said that the Negro shall forthwith attend the school of his choice. It was because it was clear that segregation, the limitation of choice, was inherently problematic and would always lead to an inferior academic experience. It was seen then as it is now, not among the platitudes, but in the projects, that parents understand this very complex conversation. Every parent, no matter how frustrating they are, because I am not a speaker, I am an educator. No matter how difficult they may be, no matter how confrontational they may come, prays the same prayer every night. And it is that their child does better than they did. We cannot expect children to do better than the generations that came before by giving them exactly what the generations before had. It is only in education that we find this clutching to the past as if it is an indication of what is best. Strange as it is, you can go into buildings that were built 100 years ago, and teaching and learning is occurring in virtually the same way. However, all that we've learned about how the mind develops, about how boys and girls learn, about the challenges that we're finding even now with new buzzwords like trauma, the implications that our children are experiencing are real. And all of the physicians, all of the educators in the world, at the end of the day, do not know better than that parent who prays. None of us know what's best for anybody else's child. If you have kids, and I do, and their objective is to prove I don't know that much about raising kids, then you know that even you as a parent are trying to figure out every single day if you've made the right decisions. So far be it for us to put in place what we believe to be governmental solutions to the most important decision that individuals will make. There is no greater freedom than deciding who will teach your children what, where, and how. There is nothing that you can offer that will increase a child's probability of growing into the person that they are put on earth to be than to put them into the best school for them. That is not determined by your zip code. That is not determined by tradition. That is determined by the parent looking into the decision-making process and asking people at our church, mosque, or synagogue, asking people on the block, looking at the uniforms that she sees walking down the street, and in many cases asking the teacher at the current school that she attends, where do you send your kid to school? School choice is the black choice because it's the only thing that at the end of the day, we can change the trajectory of our child's lives. This system that we refer to as the United States of America has been meticulously maintained and designed to make sure that black people in particular never make it to the top. But they messed around and left a crack door. And in this case, it's access to school choice. We have seen, after generations, that when children are given access to the best education that their community has to offer, they excel. And I submit to you that each one of you probably has a story about somebody in your life, in a school, somewhere, saying that they saw something special in you and creating a path for you. If you have traveled the path that I have traveled, then poverty should have ended this story a long time ago. But it didn't, because there were people along the way who pulled me out and put me in such and such a class. When I was acting a fool, put me somewhere else. Those people created the best version of school choice that we had in our generations. We have a new version. It's a purer version. And it is this. You, as a parent, pick the best school for your child and no one else.
I will not be long because I'm actually late to doing my show. And so we're going to be doing that just over there in just a second. And first of all, we have had numerous conversations all across the country. I have traveled to Tulsa, Oklahoma, Nashville, Memphis, Atlanta. We've been to Florida. We've been in just so many different places all around this country. And the one thing that is consistent, black parents are not interested in the BS. They're sick and tired of the next superintendent with a 10-year plan. They're sick and tired of somebody saying, I'm going to save education. Because what they know is that their kids in the 5th grade, you got a 10-year plan. Look, by the time you're 10 years up, they're going to be gone. And so I've had other people tell me, man, you know, you supporting this and that's supporting white folks. And I'm like, you can say whatever you want to say, but here's the deal. Charles School's not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere. So we got a decision to make. We can fight for one system, and people say change that system. Or we can say we can fight for that system, but also create our own schools. When Tyler Perry got the BET Award, he said, Oscar so white, he said, have at it. But I'm going to be building my own studio. On October 5th and 6th, I'm going to be in Atlanta, and I was one of the folks who got that special box from him inviting where he's having the grand opening of his new studios. Now, imagine if Tyler Perry said, I'm going to keep trying to knock my head and try to get Paramount and Sony and Warner Brothers and Universal to do my films. He was like, damn that, I got to build a studio. Marva Collins is one of the greatest educators we've ever had. But she got sick and tired of the Chicago public school system and left to start her own school. But what happened on the west side of Chicago? Economy tanked. Parents couldn't afford to send their kids to the school. And so the school eventually shut down. A month after that school shut down, her daughter committed suicide, who ran that school, because she was so pained by the school closing down. People talk about KIPP. Ain't no KIPP without a black woman. Mm-hmm. Ain't no KIPP without Mrs. Ball. Her teaching methods is what caused the KIPP co-founder to say, oh, this is the way you educate children. And that to this day forms a model for how KIPP is teaching their kids. Really? But we sitting here arguing when KIPP has more than 200 schools across the country, Yes Network, yet the largest black-run charter system, at best 20?
I don't think so. 10
At
maybe.
best? Now think about that. What Margaret is doing, what Shawn is doing, what Steve is doing, if they killing it, I want them to have 10 more schools. And if they killing it with 10 more schools, I'm like, give them 20. If they killing it with 20 or 30, but here's the piece. If there's a traditional principal who's killing it,
Give them 10.
Study, replicate it, give them 5, 10 more. I'm fine with that. But what I will not do is continue to have conversations. It's about budgets. It's about salaries. It's about this, that, and the other. And when I've sat, and look, I've sat in school board meetings. And do you know what never comes up? Students. All these discussions and debates about salaries and bargaining and how much money's going here, going there. And I'm sitting there going, let me know when y'all gonna bring up the students, which is why I asked. All right, those 3 schools, what was the performance? It comes down to performance. Every other system in this country, we judge it by it. We judge sports by performance. Y'all watch American Idol. Get our ass out. She can't sing. Performance. Everything is performance, yet when it comes to our children, then we don't really want to have a performance conversation. It's all this other stuff. Now, I want black people running charter schools. I want black people choosing curriculum. I want black people controlling those contracts. And I'm not going to apologize for it for a day, because if the reason I'm able to stand here and do what I do in media, because I went to a magnet school, Jack Yates High School in Houston, one of the most historic black high schools there, and that's why I was able to do it. And I had a 4-year head start on everybody when I went to college. College for me was like going to high school twice, because literally I'd already gone through that stuff when I was in high school. Our kids are going to ask us the question 20 years from now. When you had the chance to fight for me for a quality education, where were you? We are 24 years away from America becoming a nation as majority of people of color. 24 years. And do you understand, at the rate that we're going, we are going to look like South Africa, where black folks are the majority of the population there, but have the highest illiteracy rate, the highest unemployment rate, and cannot qualify for the very jobs. This generation has to say, the fight that I'm making today is for those kids, so in 2043 and beyond, we're giving them a shot at a future. And they don't want to hear jack about somebody's contract. They don't want to hear jack about, okay, I couldn't go to a meeting, or who's I talking to. What they want to know is, did I have a shot at being able to be educated? And that has to be our focus. And so, if some of y'all want to keep having that fight, that's fine. But my whole piece is very simple. It's empowering black people to control the education and the economics of our community, and that's what it boils down to. We're going to end this on this here. Prince E put together this amazing video about the state of our public school system. I love this video. It's got millions of views. I'm going to end on this. So I ain't running out, but I literally have to go do my show. But watch this video, folks.
Everybody's a genius. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today on trial we have modern day schooling. Glad you could come. Not only does he make fish climb trees, but also makes them climb down and do a 10-mile run. Tell me, school, are you proud of the things you've done? Turning millions of people into robots? Do you find that fun? Do you realize how many kids relate to that fish swimming upstream in class, never finding the gifts thinking they are stupid, believing they are useless? Well, the time has come when questions is call school to the stand, accuse them of killing creativity and
to 24 on the other youth bill. Yeah.
Thank you.